You're listening to Kate Palmer from SparkleTart.com.
Hi, this is another Copic beginner tutorial, and today we're going to do a really pretty brown hair. The image that I'm using today is one of the ones from Sweet Pea Stamps. This is drawn by Elizabeth Bell,
And this one is called Teeny Tiny. First, you'll need to stamp your image. I like using Memento Tuxedo black ink.
and then lift the stamp off. You should have a nice, crisp, clear image to work with. Now, as a Copic beginner, I often got very frustrated by colouring hair. There are some amazing Copic colourists out there who do truly stunning things with hair, and for some reason I imagined as a beginner that's what I should be doing. Needless to say, I was failing dismally and getting very frustrated. I'm going to show you how to do a very basic hair combo using 4 colours. So the combination I'm using is E41, E53, E25 and E29. You could either drop off the E41 or the E29.
As beginners, we're often drawn to smaller images because they look a little bit easier to colour. But this means that there's also not very much space for blending those Copic marker colours. So that's the kind of image I'm going to be showing you today. I'll give you some simple steps to colour in the hair in small areas. The easiest thing to do is start with your lightest colour.
In this case it's E41. And I just mark in where my light spots are going to be. So my light's coming from this direction here. So I'll have a little bit of light just here, here, and across here, just sort of creeping up to the back of her head. And what that allows is that just gives an idea where to keep those light colours.
As a beginner, the idea of light and shade can be a little bit daunting. If you're worried about it, just aim for basically the middle of each feature. The middle of each strand of hair, the middle of the dress.
Now the next thing I like to do is take my darkest colour, so in this case it's E29, and then just mark where the darkest areas will go. Now this image is nice and simple. It will be the darkest just under the flower here. Now I'm just making really quite tiny little marks. In some spots they're almost minuscule little dots. Just to make that darker. So I'm not even worrying so much about colouring the hair right now as putting on the shadow. Now the other place that it will be dark is down here. Now when using these dark colours next to the skin, be very careful. Apply as lightly as you can, because if you get this on the face it's kind of game over. We all know that you can use the blender to remove a little colour, but with any of these really dark colours it's never really gone completely. Alright, so I've got a little of the dark added to my image. There'll be a little bit more down here just behind her shoulder, and a little bit more where the hair. I'll show you this a bit closer. So that's all I've done at the moment. I've added the palest colour where the shine on her hair will be, and I've added the darkest colour where those shadows will be. That's it. Okay. Next is to grab your second darkest colour. This is usually the mid-tone, and this one is E25. And what you're going to do is just add this next to that darkest colour, just using your normal blending techniques. not going to worry about adding stripes in the hair or different hair tones or anything like that. This is where Copic beginners begin. And I hope you can see here that I'm just using little strokes to blend out from this darker colour just dragging that colour out. Now this is only the first coat, keep in mind. It gets better every time you lay another colour down or another layer of colour. Again, in these small areas near the face, just be a little careful. And this is how it looks after that second darker colour has been added. I'm then swapping to E53.
Now you might notice as I'm using this colour that I'm not actually using any particular Copic blending techniques. There's no circle blending, there's no proper flicking for this base layer. Literally all I'm doing is laying the colours one over the other and making sure that I sort of add a little bit of a lighter colour over the darker colour and then blend outwards. What I mean by that is I start with my Copic marker on the darker colour and then I sort of drag it into the area that doesn't have any colour yet. I find if you go the other way, so if you start from the white paper and drag your lighter colour into the darker colours, that you get a little bit of colour bleaching rather than blending. So all I'm doing here is laying the colours one on top of each other, going from darkest to lightest, just to sort of give me a bit of like a pattern to follow.
And that's about where it should be at the moment. You can see it's quite sort of patchy and not very well blended. That's where that first layer starts off. If yours looks like this, fantastic, you have finished your first layer, but don't stop here. So I'm going to leave my E29 alone and swap back to the E25. And this just involves adding another layer of colour over that previous layer. Now it's the layering of colour that helps achieve the blending. So that first layer is never going to look perfect. It doesn't matter how much of a Copic expert you are. That first layer will always look slightly scrappy. That's okay. That's how this all starts. Now with this second layer, you can see I'm adding a few sort of more little strokey bits. So instead of trying to just blend, I'm making a few little marks, creating a few little random lines. I'm now going to the E53 and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm adding another layer, but making sure that I've got a few scrappy little lines.
And of course making sure I'm going from the darkest area towards the lightest part so I get blending rather than bleaching. You're watching this part in real time, so yes, I am really making those quick little movements. That's what actually gives me the very light feathery lines that make the hair look really pretty.
Now excuse me while I turn this for a second. I find that it's easier to create those really fine lines and flick. If I'm either moving the marker away from me or towards me.
At this point I am using a Copic blending technique. I'm using flicking here.
I'm now going back to the E25 again. And excuse me while I move my image. To make those fine lines that I'm doing now, I need to have the marker either moving towards me or away from me. Back to the E53.
At this point I'm using as light a touch as I possibly can to get beautiful fine lines, which is what gives the texture and definition to the hair. So I'm basically scraping the very, very tip of this E53 just at the edges where it meets the darker brown. This results in beautiful streaky lines while still allowing the colours to blend.
And back to the E41. Now you may notice that I haven't used this on anything but that very first layer
to mark where the very lightest areas are.
And that's because it's so very easy on small images to overcolour and then lose the light out of the hair. So I find that in just doing a couple of quick strokes with this, since I've already got a layer underneath, that's all that's really needed. Now there are a couple of blips that I've made towards the edges. I'm just going to clean those up with my blender marker. Now I'm going back to the E29 for the final time, and I'm just going to very carefully add some of that shadow back in that's been lost. Now I'm not adding it everywhere. And again, you'll see I'm being extremely careful next to the skin. So you've seen those 3 layers added, and that is the result. So if I get really close here, you can see the little strands aren't perfect, the blending's not perfect, but neither is our hair. And sometimes those little variations and differences make it look a bit more lifelike and give it a bit more bounce. So when I now move this back from the camera, you can see that that has quite a bit of life to it. It's not a flat hair colour, and as you can see, it doesn't need to be perfectly coloured to give a nice illusion of shine and colour and sort of variation. So again, when you look at it from back here, and let's face it, most of us don't hold our cards up to our noses, and neither do the people receiving them. This is what you'll see. So it's a very simple colour, just using a little bit of blending and a little bit of flicking. And as long as you leave that original area that you've coloured with that first palest Copic marker, so the E41, as long as you make a real effort to leave that alone while you're colouring the rest of the hair, you won't overcolour.
As a general rule of thumb, when I'm colouring with my Copics, I try not to do any more than 3 layers of colour. Not using 3 colours or adding 3 colours together, but 3 actual full layers. And this is because if you do more than that, you'll notice that some spots start to get shiny, and this is where there's a build-up of colour in the paper. There's just too much ink for it to cope with. When you're doing small areas like this, especially the second and third layers, because you're adding such a little amount of ink, you've got a little bit of leeway. So basically you can do almost up to 5 layers of just that little tiny flicking until it looks right to you. So on these small areas where you're not adding very much ink, it gives you a bit more room to play. Now you've probably seen this card before in one of my previous clips where I was showing you how to do the spotty background, so I won't bore you again with all the details. But this was how I finished off my card. Now as you can see, that very simple hair, which will work with a multitude of colours. Have a look on my blog if you're looking for some other hair colour options. This will just work beautifully, and it's good for beginners, it's good for sort of people just wanting to practice hair colours. It's a really simple technique for these smaller images that have smaller amounts of hair. So lay down that very first layer, just sort of blocks of colour and then use the flicking motion to blend and lay down the subsequent layers, just so that you get some of those flicks and little strands of hair showing. So I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this. It was really heaps of fun to colour. I love doing this image, and I'll be back with more soon. Thanks so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye.